Often a game comes around that reshapes a generation of games, changes the landscape, is a monster, big budget, amazing blockbuster sequel with a story that would make Hollywood jealous, and the gameplay is a distant afterthought. Outriders isn't that game. Outriders is a Sci-Fi Channel original film complete with campy characters, somewhat self-aware, winking, breaking the fourth wall protagonist, complete with gruff voice and one-liners, cheesy sci-fi tropes straight out of the best of 80s B-movie films, and all the shooty bang-bang loot drops and superpowers you can shake a stick at. Outriders is Sharknado in space with superpowers, and it's fucking brilliant for it. So let's take a look at what makes it a good game, starting with the graphics. Right off the bat, you can tell it's more double than AAA, as the graphics, while nice, particularly the environments, which are varied, often colorful and lush, and even can be very stereotypical desert, jungle, or battlefield things, still manage to look nice. Character animations are passable, and it all plays out at a solid frame rate, 75 frames per second at 1080p on my Ryzen 5 GTX 1660 thoroughly mid-range rig, with occasional dips at launch. However, a few patches seem to have worked that out. It's not going to change the world. It's not a game you need to get the newest GPU for, thankfully, as we sit in the middle of the great GPU drought of 2021. But it does the job, and it sets the scene. Story. So you can take the story, or you can leave it. It's not everyone's cup of tea, as I've seen from reviews out there already, and people's general disdain for it. If you thought it was some deep Mass Effect RPG-style choice-based story, you thought wrong. There are dialogue options, but every single one is more for backstory, not an actual choice. You make choices, though. Lots of them in the gameplay department. As for story, it's pretty linear and cheesy, as I mentioned earlier, like a Sci-Fi Channel movie or Tremors or something in that vein. It has lore, it has a backstory. There is some serious things at play. It's about the end of the Earth and colonizing another planet and running into the locals and things of that nature. But how your character engages with it is with some snark, a few self-aware jokes, and the absolute love of kicking ass that we as the player tend to share. The protagonist wants to skip the dialogue too, and just fuck shit up unless he has a witty one-liner. But if you don't, you're treated to a well-thought-out story, with some serious moments and a point to make about humanity, survival, and the moral quandary of us versus them. It's still Sharknado in space with superpowers at its core though, and that's what I love about it. Your mileage may vary. Audio. The guns absolutely pound, sounding more like 40K bolters than the semi-traditional firearms they're depicted as, but that makes them feel more impactful, so I like it. The environmental sounds and music exist, aren't offensive, but aren't very memorable, and are most of the time drowned out by the daka expelling lead into other humans and space monsters alike. The voice acting is a mixed bag, some of it being top tier, others being bad, and some being so bad it's amazing, which fits right in with the B-movie vibe, so it didn't bother me much, and most of it is brief enough to get you right back into the thick of battle, which leads me to the main point, gameplay and systems. So the cover system is mostly useless. It's not the Division, and it isn't trying to be. That's important to remember. Dodging and using superpowers is where you want to be, and the powers are satisfying to use, having enough variety in the 4 classes that you can make dozens of builds just with how you set up the powers on a given class, and the gear modifies that even further. All of it, every piece of gear will modify a power in some way, and in interesting ways at that. The game has 4 potential classes: the Devastator, the Trickster, the Pyromancer, and the Technomancer. The loot and ability system is much more Diablo than it is Division, and that's to its benefit. Each class has its own set of abilities and its own healing mechanic. I leveled Pyromancer because fire's awesome, and though I ran into some serious difficulty spikes, they were my own fault, we'll get to that later, but the base class fantasy is fireballs, fire waves, and going full Baron-geddon, making enemies into living bombs. Marking a foe with your ability makes it so that when you kill it, you heal. This can create a feast or famine scenario, where you get lots of healing at once, too much in fact, because you can't use it all, or none when you need it, and you just die because you didn't get a kill. I'm not sure how the other classes fare at higher levels, but I haven't heard any complaints like that, so maybe it's just pyro. You can solve this problem with a good build and good gear, as I learned later on in the game, with either sustained damage staggering out over time so the enemies drop one by one rather than all at once in a big glorious explosion, but that's less fun, or flat out spells that heal on cast. but they're boring, and I chose a more blow every fucking thing that moves up, all of you motherfuckers must die build. So the problems I had were my own fault because I went with cool over mechanically sound. World tiers. So there's a world tier mechanic where as you do well, you level up tiers, and they increase the enemy difficulty as well as the level of gear you can wear and drops. The problem that I had was being a stubborn asshole and not turning the difficulty down ever. Combine that with a checkpoint system which is frankly just fucking terrible, and the constant network problems the game had around launch, and I ended up rage quitting my stream and punching my microphone. The network problems are better now, and the other two issues are still the same. I finished the last boss of the campaign at World Tier 12. I highly recommend playing the campaign much lower than that, maybe 5 to 7, unless you're a sadist. I also got to beat the boss, got to the last cutscene, which immediately got disconnected from the network in the middle of the cutscene, so I didn't get to watch it. So I went back, turned the world tier down to like 6 or 7, so that I could very quickly take on the boss so that I could see the cutscene. This is annoying. There were definitely problems at launch. Here we sit almost 3 weeks out from launch, and I don't find any network problems whatsoever. Your mileage may vary. Beyond that is the end game, raising your world tier, doing missions, dungeons on a time-based reward system. Not the biggest fan of the timer system. The same reason I don't like Mythic plus dungeons in World of Warcraft, among other things. And raising your gear cap to level 50. The character level maxes out at level 30. Good fun? Not super unique when you look at its actual contemporaries, which aren't so much Destiny and The Division as they are Diablo and Torchlight, which have very similar endgame loops despite looking so wildly different. Conclusion. The box price gets you everything, $60 with no microtransactions as of writing this, and it took me a solid 30 hours to beat the main game. I did every side quest, and like I said, died a lot, had to replay entire levels dozens of times, so your time may be a lot less. And there's another 20 hours or more in the end game if you're into that kind of thing. It looks okay, the story is what it is, a B movie, and the shooting and abilities are fun and cool to play with. The loot system is interesting and constantly makes you change your build when you find a legendary or just a cool epic piece of gear that has a very specific ability boost to it. The game is fucking awesome. It's gameplay over story, it's style over substance, and overall my rating on a scale of buy the fucking thing, cheap the fuck out, and wait for a sale, or fuck this game is buy the fucking thing out of 10. Fuck Jim Sterling.